Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the penultimate session of the Berlin Global Dialogue. And my name is Suzanne Lynch. I'm Brussels Bureau Chief with Bloomberg News. And I'm delighted to be chairing this panel on doubling down on Europe in a multipolar world. I'm joined by a stellar cast of panelists for this discussion. On my right here, René Obermann, Chairman of Airbus. Then we have Harshil Asnami, President and Head, Tech Mahindra, and Jean-Christophe Tellier, CEO of UCB. Now, we're meeting as Europe faces a number of challenges. Security challenges on the defense front from Russia, economic competition, even coercion from China, and, of course, continuing strained relations with the United States. At the same time, there's a lot of discussion here in Europe and obviously here at the Berlin Global Dialogue over the last few days about the issue of EU competitiveness and the kind of challenges facing European businesses. So to start off our conversation, Jean-Christophe, I'm going to start with you. What's your assessment of the state of the European business landscape at this moment?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be at this roundtable with you all. So I think that Europe has a choice to make, and the choice has not been made yet. And when I think about the pharmaceutical industry and the innovation industry in the pharma environment in particular, we are in a position of strength. You can look at a lot of numbers and then you realize how much our industry is creating a lot of wealth for Europe. It's 145 billion of positive trade, the numbers of jobs, direct or indirect, 2 million plus. And so you can look at the industry in Europe and say, well, things are doing well. Actually, when you look at the trends and when you look at the evolution for the last 20 years, you see a different story. Europe have lost in the last 5 years 50% of our ability to run and implement clinical trials. 25 years ago, 1 new drug out of 2 were coming from Europe. It's only 1 out of 5 today. And you can continue with this type of numbers. So you can feel that in terms of competitiveness, we are really losing at a relatively high speed. On the other end, the contribution that is requested from this industry to public expenditure have never been as high as today. If I take just one example, in the last 5 years, we have doubled our contributions to public health in Europe. So on one side, you can see a loss of ground from an innovation standpoint. On the other side, you see a higher contribution in an environment which is highly volatile and changing. So I do feel that Europe has a choice to make in order to continue to double down on innovation in pharma in Europe to be competitive in the future.
I mean, that trend you identify, that divergence that's been happening over the last 20 years or so is something that obviously is a concern to policymakers here. René, I mean, you've spoken a lot about the need for a massive build-up in defence capabilities in Europe, a massive investment. Could you talk to us a bit about what you feel is needed in that field?
We have a number of capability gaps at this point in time, and our dependence on US military supply in high capabilities is particularly concerning. So Europe has and will continue to embark on an agenda to be more self-sufficient, and that the range is broad, from space capabilities, where Airbus, for instance, plays a big role, to so-called deep strike capabilities to be able to hit potential enemies deeper in their logistics. But it goes further to electronic warfare and ultimately even to nuclear deterrence. I think we would be, and I know this is high potential for an SH storm when I say this, but I say it nonetheless. I think we need to consider quickly now, together with our French partners and our British partners, how we can increase our capabilities also on the nuclear deterrence side and close a capability gap in the realm of tactical nuclear capabilities.
I mean, where do you see the balance coming from? Is it more public investment? What's the role of the private sector? What's the balance there?
That's a very good question. I think just money alone won't crack it. Yes, it's important to be able to fund, long-term developments where there is no market immediately, which are too big for just the private sector to to engage, but the state shouldn't always consider, making subsidies. I think the state should be, placing orders and giving planability for the actors involved and for, young companies in particular, because they need cash quicker than established firms, but also for established companies. And then the big, I think, need for change is that large corporates and primes collaborate systematically with defense tech companies, with young companies, in order to bring up the innovation potential and integrate the tech innovation into traditional systems and new systems going forward. Because yes, we need mass, but we do need to network our assets, our defense assets, and we need to make them more intelligent.
Okay, we might come back to some of those points. Harshal, you have just spent more than 20 years in Silicon Valley and have decided to come to Europe. Yes. So what's your perspective from your own background? Obviously, your company very focused on India, but also got a global presence. How do you assess the state of Europe now vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
Well, no, firstly, thanks for having me here. After 25 long years in the Silicon Valley, I have crossed the pond. And I've moved here. And I've moved here for a reason, because I'm a big believer in the opportunity that Europe offers. In fact, the Mahindra Group is a big believer in the opportunity that Europe offers. Today, this is one of the fastest growing markets for us. And this is the next engine of growth, not just for Tech Mahindra, for Mahindra Group as a whole. And over the decades, Mahindra Group has had very deep partnerships in the region, whether it is on our auto and the farm sectors, which sources from very strategic partners in the region for its advanced manufacturing components, or whether it is Tech Mahindra, which has been in the region for more than 40 years. In fact, we started off as a joint venture with British Telecom, which not many people know of. We were, in fact, known as Mahindra British Telecom before we became Tech Mahindra. And since then, we have evolved. We are present in 26 different countries across Europe. And in fact, some lesser-known facts about us in Europe is we also own Pininfarina, the Italian industrial design firm, which is one of the finest out there, which is the name behind design of Ferraris. And we also have Mahindra Holidays, which operates out of Nordics and in Spain. We have more than 1,000 employees operating more than 20 resorts in the country. So all in all, I see Mahindra Group not just deep here, but also continuing to invest into the future of Europe. And we look at this as a big bet for us.
And is it the consumer market? Is it the sheer scale of the market here? Or what is it that's attracting you to Europe?
Yeah, no, so I think with the increasingly fragmented world around us, I think we believe that Europe has today a very strategic position to take on from where US seems to be leaving off. But the US started looking inwards. China is trying to fill the space, but it's unlikely to get broad-based legitimacy in the world which is more democratic leaning, in a world which is more value-based. So China may find hard to build the legitimacy as a global leader. So that leaves Europe to find a wonderful position in this volatile world as a leader of the global world, because it brings a huge market, particularly when we look at all the group companies of Mahindra and align them with what Europe has to offer. There is a very strong synergy that we believe exists here. And I believe it has the stability. And regulation sometimes, while a lot has been said about how Europe is always regulating, but it can also be a differentiator. It brings in that stability that the world needs today. So that's why we're very bullish about this space.
I mean, Jean-Christophe, talking about there this idea of, well, this reality that America, as you mentioned, is retreating inwards, really. The pharmaceutical industry in particular was caught in the crosshairs of Donald Trump's tariffs. Can you talk a bit about how that has impacted you? Are you confident that that's the rate that was agreed is to stay? And should have the European Union kind of fought back a little bit stronger on those tariffs?
Well, there may be two elements that I want to put on the table here. The first one is medicine have never been included in tariffs in the past, and I think there is a good reason for that. The complexity of the supply chain, the globality of the supply chain, and the potential impact on tariffs are not only on innovation, but on providing access to medicine for the patients who need that. That there is, I think, a very specific situations towards tariffs that require to look at medicine in a very different eye. And actually, this is what currently the situation is, despite these tariffs. And then when I think about the complexity of the supply chain, you need to understand that some of the APIs, so the active ingredients, come from a certain region, so China, India, then the rest of the supply chain, which we name drug substance, is coming from a lot of different countries, and then move to the last part, drug products, that is maybe coming on a different country. So when you put tariffs, you need to understand, so what are the fragility of our supply chain to be exposed to tariff coming from Korea, China, Europe, Switzerland, and then US. So that's one of the elements. Now, the second element is the fact that tariff is just one piece of what we are currently facing from the change of the environment. There is another piece which is tax, and there is another layer which is what is so-called MFN, which is price difference versus US and Europe. So yes, we are really actively engaged with the administrations to try to make sure that we can illustrate what will be the consequences and try to make sure that we continue to provide and stimulate an environment that, one, support innovations, and two, ensure sustainability of the supply chain and making sure that the patients will not continue to have access to the drugs.
And do you think Europe kind of played the right card here in terms of these tariffs?
I think Europe have made the right choice not to counter-tariff medicine because that was the wrong way. And so I think that we need to continue to evaluate how we do that. There is maybe a second element that I wanted to highlight, which is the onshoring piece. We were an industry heavily globalized. We were on one centers of API, for the rest of the world, right? Post-COVID and post the war in Ukraine and all of the current situation and the evolutions in the defense, you can see a more research of sovereignty at the regional level, which for an industry like us provide a certain challenge because it takes time for us to change our supply chain. I guess it's the same thing for the aerospace, right? So we need to adjust to this new environment where we are moving from a global perspective to a more multi-regional perspective.
René, it's very timely really talking to you here today because Airbus this week announced the details of this tie-up with two others, Leonardo and Thales, on the space. Talk to us a little bit about that. And really, are you going to be able to take on the might of some of these American competitors in space, like Elon Musk, etc.? Does Europe, do your tie-up of the three companies, do you have what it takes?
You're appealing to our competitive mindset. Yes, is the answer. Look, it's very simple. For decades, Europe did not have a good and cohesive or coherent ambition for space. And that manifests in a few numbers. Last year, there were more than 140 launches in the United States into space, to orbit. 68, I think, in China, 23 or so in India, 3 in Europe, okay? That tells a story, number one. Number two, we are completely dependent on one low Earth orbit satellite constellation, which is called Starlink. And that is so vital for communication purposes, for civil and military purposes. Now, imagine for a second a situation where there is no more GPS or no more, certain communications no more possible, because it all depends on the goodwill of an administration which I think has become more transactional than reliable, as far as I'm concerned, in Europe. And therefore, Europe, and I hope that European regulators, in particular at the DG4 and others who are concerned with this, understand this, does need the capacity, the industrial capacity and the capability to develop technologically and industrially what it takes to come up with a constellation, a low Earth orbit constellation, quickly to reduce and eventually eliminate that single point of failure which our security depends upon. That has to happen, and it has to happen now. And therefore, this constellation, what we have just put together, at least has a good chance to be strong enough, capable enough to provide that level of competition it takes. And I do very much hope we don't get lost again in the nitty-gritties of some inward-looking concerns of regulators in this regard.
And I mean, is there anything specific from the European Union, from Brussels, that you're looking for, or do you think that they have kind of
yes.
change it?
We have, of course, we have to demonstrate this is for the greater good of Europe, and I think we can. What I'm saying is the old paradigm was always that, for instance, in telecoms, this was a regulation which was obsessed in Europe, ensuring that we have many, many different operators. And as a result, none of the operators was capable enough to be strong enough to be standard setting globally. Yeah. Here we have a different situation. We're in different times now, and I hope we are able to adopt.
So that lack of consolidation we saw in other sectors.
That's right, exactly. And we still don't have a complete digital single market. We still do not have a banking union, and I could go on with that list. It's time to act. Now we have a space union. Airbus as such has grown as a European-rooted company and as a global market leader because it was possible. Now we do the same in space, hopefully. And we hope to get a lot of support because it's very needed.
Okay. Getting back to you, Harshal, we were talking about the geopolitical context. Obviously, India has found it also in the midst of a kind of an escalating over the last few months standoff with the US administration on tariffs.
Yeah.
How is that impacting the Indian business community? I know it's a very diverse group I'm talking about, and is that impacting your decisions to look elsewhere, for example, into Europe?
Yeah, no, let's not kid ourselves. The tariffs, the heavy tariffs that are coming on India are definitely not helping and will impact GDP to some extent. But India's growth journey is firmly on its path. And India has always believed in a multipolar environment, working with a lot of supportive nations looking in the same direction. So in some sense, over a period of time, we believe the supply chains will rewire themselves. We believe Europe will play a very, very important role when it comes to India. And we heard Minister Goyal speaking yesterday. We are close to doing the FTA with Europe. We are there, but we are still not there. There's still a lot of back and forth happening on a bunch of regulations which are still coming in to the last minute. So I could sense a little bit of frustration in the minister's voice yesterday, but I think broadly speaking, we are coming very close to doing the FTA, which can be very, very consequential for both the regions. Because I think we share a lot of common values and shared ambitions. There's lots of synergy. And if Europe is able to take that pivotal position along with India, I think they can be a force to reckon with.
I mean, we've been hearing a lot of this conversation from Brussels about that they feel, the European Union, that it's time to solidify trade relations with other partners because you've got this more isolationist United States on one hand and decreasingly trustworthy China on the other. So let's see if this FTA with India comes to fruition anytime soon. But I mean, do you think, I can open this up to the panel here, but do you think that the return of Donald Trump to the White House and the belligerent stance from China in a way has been kind of the shot in the arm Europe has needed? We all know about the Draghi report. People have been speaking about it, but maybe this is the wake-up call. What do you think, René?
The same applies when you transform a company. Yeah. If it's a large company and there is no crisis, it's much harder to transform it. Yeah. So I think we are in crisis, and I think the diagnostics are done. We all understand where we are, I think. Now we need to go out and share, the way out of it with a lot of people in our constituencies and beyond. And I think the transformation in Europe will take many years, if not decades, to become more resolved, to become more ambitious, to become more technologically capable again in the high technologies of the next generation, for instance. But unless we, all of us in this room, who we are, very privileged, because we have good education, we are financially well off, etc. Unless we take initiative and support our political leaders, it's not going to happen. So far, we've all pointed and criticized, particularly Brussels or our local governments or regional governments, and it was always them. And I'm hearing this all over again, and it makes me sick. Because if we are not part of the solution and we don't stand shoulder by shoulder to our politician, everything's at stake. Yeah, how can we expect normal people who are not on that level of, financial wealth to be not voting for extremists, right or left? How can we expect them if they don't have good leadership and good role models? If you allow me one last sentence, I'm hearing a lot of people from the elites saying, if the situation escalates in Europe, or in Berlin, or in Germany, we have a second home in South Africa, or in Canada, or New Zealand. And how on earth can we expect our soldiers for €3,000 a month to be cannon fodder, to go out there and fight for our freedom if the situation escalates? If we as elites have that kind of mentality, that makes me sick.
I mean, that's quite a stark image you paint here in Berlin of that reality. Do you really feel that there's a serious existential threat in terms of defense, in terms of security now in Europe?
Absolutely, I do. And I think our intelligence services, I'm not even making my own judgment here, I'm just referring to very good sources. They pretty much all say the same. This is not, the agenda of the Kremlin is not stopping in Ukraine. And we are in need to increase our ability to deter, because only if we are able to deter, we can avoid a hot war.
Do you think there's been we know that there's been a huge shift in mindset here in Germany and across Europe about defense spending?
We have a big mindset problem still, I'm sorry.
Really?
We have a big mindset problem.
But as you say, politicians they're listening to their voters who are struggling with other, spending challenges, other, putting food on the table, social. Is it not difficult, though, for governments to prioritise defence when there's so much else they have to?
It's chicken and egg. All of us in this room, if we share the same, let's say, conviction that we need to up our game and become more capable to defend ourselves, if we don't support the public mindset building, if we don't support our politicians in the argument that if we do more for our own security, it comes at a cost. Yes, we can't do everything, right? But we need to help them to deliver the messages out there. We need to talk to schools and universities. We need to talk to our companies and our people in there. If we don't support them, they can't do it alone. So we shouldn't point the finger at our politicians. We should find a new way of collaboration.
Because these kind of trade-offs are the decisions that our politicians make every day. Yes, Jean-Christophe.
No, I fully agree with that. I would summarize that as three components. One, we need to move from fragmentations to integration. You take all of the different challenges we need to face today. The solution today is too fragmented. We used to divide the problem, solve it problem by problem, hoping that the addition of all of that will create a solution. It does not. So in healthcare, it's obvious, right? We need to from fragmentation to integrations. Two, we need to move from translational to outcome-driven, right? Very often, we do not agree. So what do we want to achieve? In healthcare, we want a society where people are best and better treated. We all want that. Stakeholders, regulators, payers, government, industry, we all want that. But we are not talking together, we are not working together, we are not really sitting at the same table to try to solve the same problem in order to deliver the same result. So collaborative, integrate, and then the last one, which I think René was alluded to, is there is a need for a cultural and a mindset shift. We need to get closer, and one of the value of this platform and this dialogue, it's a dialogue between politicians and business. We don't talk enough. We are not together enough to solve the problem.
But we're coming to the end now, but actually something that I want to pick up on that, Harshal, you said after 25 years in Silicon Valley, which is, well, maybe regulation, too much regulation, is not a bad thing for Europe. That could you just say, do you think it is a competitive advantage? Because that's not what we hear a lot from business here in Europe.
If I have to expand on it, I think to some extent, over-regulation, of course, is not good. But I think broadly, it is today bringing the sense of stability that Europe offers the world, which is kind of a very vital counterweight to the volatility that we see elsewhere. And of course, comparing Europe to Silicon Valley is not a good thing, because Europe should never try to even copy Silicon Valley. It should just focus on more sustained, long-term, structured innovation. Silicon Valley's culture and mindset is about risk, about scale, and about speed, while on the other hand, I think what Europe brings to the table is stability, a structure, and that cultural nuance that it should cherish and should be proud of. And in fact, while a lot of naysayers around, I see a lot of sure and silent reforms underway, and there are structural reforms in Europe. 160 billion getting poured into AI, into green energy, into cloud is a big intent. And we are also seeing a massive push towards spending in the right areas, whether it is defense, whether it is AI. And I think these changes, and also the move towards CMU, Capital Markets Union, if that happens, I think it will be a game changer.
Yeah, these levers are big. But one question, because I think there's a lot to learn from India. I've just spent a few days there, and I think we Europeans should look at India more openly and learn from them. How do you adopt AI regulation there? Is it similar to the European regulatory framework? Because I do think personally it needs to be simplified in Europe.
You think it's too onerous, the
it's
AI
more than 100 pages, and it's more than 100 pages in the appendix. Not the developers alone are affected, but the customers who deploy AI systems. They are sometimes uncertain as to what extent they are compliant with and not.
Yeah, it's not an easy answer. I mean, regulations are important, particularly when it comes to AI and building our own sovereignty, which is so critical for every country to have. Everyone in the world today is largely over-indexed on US technology. And I don't think it's an easy answer. We are trying to build our own.
And some people would say that the public is behind the European Union when it comes to digital regulation and AI. That's the one bit of regulation that the European public feel there should be more. And yet, obviously, Brussels is coming up against very much pushback on Washington. But a final word now to René. I mean, are you positive about what's to come with Europe? Do you think there's going to be, or there has already seen a shift in mindset in terms of talking and reflecting the concerns of business?
Never waste a good crisis. I think we have ample opportunity, and I think if we manage to get a new shoulder by shoulder, a new form of collaboration between business leaders and political leaders, I think we have a much bigger chance to win, as if we keep finger pointing at each other. That's plain wrong, and we need to change.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's a nice note to finish on. Thank you very much to the panel for that conversation. Please stay in your seats. I'm going to hand over now to the chair of the Berlin Global Dialogue, and we'll be hearing from the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, imminently. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, for the final session, the closing session of this year's Berlin Global Dialogue. And I'm thrilled and delighted to have President von der Leyen here addressing us at the end of the conference, which went a lot on these topics, which we're discussing also in the final session, about competitiveness in Europe and where's Europe going. I was telling her on the way up that our slogan is very much on the global perspective at looking at Europe. We also had about 1,000 CEOs with us, and we have a lot of global views on looking at Europe. And, there are a lot of positive sides as well. And, of course, you had a European summit on Thursday, which talked also about this issue of competitiveness, which for business people, is obviously a very important one. The defense side, the climate side, and all these things we had sessions on and discussions on from all over the world, and we are sort of debating that. But I think in the end, action is needed, is I think one thing, but there's lots of opportunities and positive stories also from looking at Europe from the outside. So no better person than the President of the European Commission to address us on these issues. Thank you so much for coming. We're very thrilled and very happy, and the floor is yours, Mr. President, Mrs. President.
Thank you very much, lieber Herr Röller. Thank you very much for the invitation, distinguished guests. Allow me to start by thanking Lars-Henrik Röller for his invitation. We've known each other since many, many years in and out of government. So it's no surprise to me to see that the Berlin Global Dialogue has become such a prominent forum in such a short space of time. At the time when we were working together, you were already grasping some of the big questions for the global economy and our own growth models, the impact of globalization and trade liberalization, the future of trade and new technologies, these were all topics that you were really working hard on it. Of course, the world has changed beyond recognition, but fundamentally, those questions are the same ones leaders, policymakers, and industry leaders are working on today. Europe is facing up to another seismic change in the way the global economy works. We may be approaching a shift in the international order, one increasingly defined by power, whether economic, technological, or military, a world of imperial ambitions and hostile actors, a world of transaction and zero-sum games, a world in which the global economy as we know it is giving way to a permanent state of flux. The point is, the world is changing faster than our policies. Our institutions must transform the way they think, the way they formulate policies and make decisions to keep pace with a rapidly changing world. And this is what I want to touch on briefly today. Before we can project strength abroad, we must renew at home. Europe faces, and I guess you've discussed it, profound challenges: economic slowdown, strategic vulnerabilities, threats to its independence and social model, but it also holds exceptional assets. Our task is now to harness these strengths, to secure a strong and independent and cohesive Europe. And ladies and gentlemen, the world of today, in this world, speed and urgency are the key factors of competitiveness. They need both long-term vision and speed of action. We see that with the United States, with China, and with other emerging economies and societies. The key for Europe in this world is to move faster, to make business easier, and to invest in what makes us unique and strong. And this is why we have put out a plan to radically speed up the completion of our single market, to really tap into the potential of our single market. And this is why we are targeting the bottlenecks that are holding our competitiveness back, from energy prices to investment to private capital. And this is why we have started a huge simplification drive. We need less complex rules, less overlap, less forms to fill out, and we need to speed up across the board an urgency mindset that must drive all of our work. Without any doubt, as I said, we have strength. The stability of our unique single market, our industries and innovators, sought after and valuable commodities in today's uncertain world. Europe is already an increasingly attractive proposition for investors. That is, for instance, thanks to the many high-potential startups in key technologies like quantum, AI, or biotech. But Europe's attractiveness extends far beyond its investment potential. It lies in our strong institutions. It lies in our commitment to the rule of law. It is in the excellence of a broad education and top research, a skilled workforce, and advanced infrastructure. This is making the European Union a uniquely balanced model in the world. But we all know that we have a problem with scale. As our startups grow, too often, the limited availability of risk capital forces them to turn to foreign investors. This is wealth and sovereignty going elsewhere. But we want this investment to choose Europe. We want to invest in the best of Europe. So you are an innovative startup. So we have to make it easier for you to scale up throughout Europe's 27 member states, but not with 27 different rules and regulations. So this is why we are preparing the so-called 28th regime for innovative startups. One simple rule for the whole of the European Union. And because we want to invest in the best of Europe, we're speeding up our work on the private capital. We call it the Savings and Investment Union. And this is why we are working on new financing models, for instance, with private investors through a new Scale Up Europe fund. We need to keep up the speed of what we have started. In a world where others move fast, Europe needs to keep up the pace. And that is my first and most important message to leave with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, this sense of realism and urgency is also driven by an underlying and fundamental reshaping of the world economy. We are in the middle of a seismic shift in how countries work with each other and against each other. Every day, we see the tools of traditional statecraft being used to weaponize interdependencies and leverage alliances. We see that these tools of traditional statecraft are being used to create chokeholds on countries and industries, to exert control and impose coercion on others. This goes to the heart of the title you have chosen for us this year in Berlin's Global Dialogue. The title, I quote, "Shifting Power and Shaping Responsibility." The starting point here is that for centuries, while economic power has always mattered, power has always been measured on military might and territorial influence. Those who controlled borders and armies also controlled the balance power in relations between countries and continents. And it would be wrong to say that this notion is outdated, because we know that hard power is more important than ever in today's world. We've seen how countries like Russia or its autocratic allies use conflict as a tool to build empires and supremacy over others. Europe has learned how imperial ambitions, wars, undermining sovereignty of others, lead in the end to disasters. Our project is different, but we cannot be naive and vulnerable. And this is why Europe is investing so heavily in our military capabilities and in boosting our own defense industries. We will unlock up to 800 billion euros in defense spending until 2030. That focus on deterrence and peace through strength is more important than ever. But at the same time, we're seeing a shift towards something far more complex to grasp and defend against. And this is new geoeconomics. Economics has become the central instrument of power in today's world. Those who control the economic levers are the ones who can exert control over others. The global supply chains, the new disruptive technologies, the capital flows, and the key inputs for our industries and our societies. As the dawn of globalization promised, all these tools can be used to create wealth, jobs, and partnerships between countries. In fact, this was the spirit that eventually led to the creation of the World Trade Organization 30 years ago. And when China joined the WTO a few years later, most of us hoped a new dawn of low tariffs and shared security and prosperity would emerge. And in a number of ways, this did deliver for a time, even if the benefits from it were not shared and spread evenly. But the cooperative world we all expected, or at least hoped for 25 years ago, is being replaced today by a confrontational global economy. Stealing technologies, hostile investments, export controls, massive subsidies. All of this is no longer the exception. These are tools for imposition and competition. Of course, this is not a completely new trend that we are discovering today. We have already seen over the last decade how the lines between national security and economic security imperatives have become blurred. In fact, they have now essentially merged. So it is not new, but it is a clear acceleration and escalation in the way interdependencies are leveraged and weaponized. In the last weeks and months alone, we've seen a rise in drastic export controls on critical inputs. We've seen the systemic use of tariffs and non-trade measures. We've seen global supply chains deployed as a vector for pressure. And we have seen every sector targeted, from energy to data, from food to technology. Europe knows the danger that lies there. It was a painful crisis when our overdependency on Russian fossil fuels, especially oil and gas, was exposed following the start of Putin's war on Ukraine. And this is a lesson we can never afford to forget or ignore. We are now in an era of geoeconomics. And for Europe, this means business as usual is no longer an option. We need to rethink the way we look at our economic and national security challenges. It means anticipating better and acting faster. It means ensuring that our economies and systems can absorb and adapt to the shocks. And achieving this requires adopting a strategic mindset and a new approach. For example, by evaluating our range of assets, opportunities, and risks, and adjusting policies to strengthen our assets, to seize the opportunities, and to counter the risks. It also involves preparing our European institutions to anticipate developments, to act decisively and coordinated, all our instruments in a consistent and in a strategic way. We have started this work in earnest. That is why we are advancing a Made in Europe strategy focused on a select set of sectors that are vital to our economic and national security. Whether it is by a complete change of gear on military spending and investment, or completing the overhaul we need in our energy systems and supply, whether it is rethinking our industrial policy, or striking new economic and investment partnerships around the world. In short, we are de-risking in the areas which are most sensitive, making Europe more independent. Speaking of independence, there are many areas I could pick up, but I want to focus today on one acutely sensitive example, which is playing out at this very moment. In recent weeks and months, China has dramatically tightened export controls over rare earth and battery materials. At least to some extent, this is part of wider economic friction between China and the United States, but it has a huge impact on us here in the European Union. We all know how important rare earths are for our industry, whether for cars, semiconductors, or military equipment. The decisions announced by the Chinese government on October 9th poses a significant risk. In essence, these actions would severely hamper other countries, except China, from developing a rare earth industry. And this threatens the stability of global supply chains and will have a direct impact on European companies. If you consider that over 90%, 90, of our consumption of rare earth magnets come from imports from China, you see the risks here for Europe and its most strategic industrial sectors, from automotives to industrial motors, dependence to aerospace, defense and aerospace, or AI chips and data centers. In the short term, we are focusing on finding solutions with our Chinese counterparts, but we are ready to use all of the instruments in our toolbox to respond if needed. And we will work with our G7 partners in a coordinated response. But we also need to look at this as a structural challenge. Our response must match the scale of the risks we face in this area. And this is why I can announce today that we are working on a new Resource EU plan along the lines of the Repower initiative. Repower EU helped us to overcome the energy crisis together after Putin cut us off the Russian fossil fuels. The aim is to secure access to alternative sources of critical raw materials in the short, medium, and long term for our European industries. And it starts with a circular economy, not for environmental reasons, but to exploit the critical raw materials already contained in products sold in Europe. Some companies can recycle up to 95% of critical raw materials in batteries. This means extracting precious raw materials, reducing waste, and of course promoting sustainable resource management. In addition, we will focus on everything from joint purchasing to stockpiling. We will boost investment in strategic projects for the production and processing of critical raw materials here in the European Union. We'll speed up work on critical raw materials partnerships with countries like Ukraine and Australia, Canada, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Chile, and Greenland. And we will invest in projects that Europe can benefit from around the world through Global Gateway. Global Gateway is in our interest, but also in the joint interest of our partners and our common global goods. I know this marks a departure from Europe's traditional caution, but the world we face today rewards speed, not hesitation, because today's world is unforgiving. And the global economy is completely different than it was even a few years ago. Europe cannot do things the same way anymore. We learned this lesson painfully with energy. We will not repeat it with critical materials. So it's time to speed up and take the action that is needed. whether on energy or raw materials, defense or digital, Europe has to strive for its independence, and this is our moment to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, the picture I've painted today is bleak, and it is the speed of fragmentation of the global economy that should set alarm bells ringing. But Europe has a plan, and it is seen as a reliable and attractive economic opportunity for partners the world over. And in an era of geo-economic instability, the European Union's offer to the world stands out. In the last year, we've reached new trade deals with Mercosur, Mexico, Indonesia, and Switzerland. We're in talks with India and want to conclude before the end of this year. We're advancing with the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, and the United Arab Emirates, and more. These new partnerships will open up rising markets, boost economic security, and avoid choke points in our supply chains. And the point here is that Europe must use its geo-economic weight to its advantage and for pursuing its own interests. This is ultimately how Europe can find its place in today's global economy. And it is how it can thrive within this new era of confrontational geoeconomics. Europe has everything it takes to make that happen, but it will require a new mindset, a mindset of urgency, of independence, of courage, and we will make it happen together. Thank you very much, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. I think this was an important speech. And I just do one or two remarks, if you allow me to. I think the first point about Europe having strength and has things to offer, I think that's resonated also what people were saying here. There's a lot of positive things in Europe. And then I think the two issues you hit on, one was the speed and the reforms and let's say the intra-European discussion about competitiveness and the omnibus. This is, of course, again, everybody agrees with that. And I think one is quite hopeful that this time we'll be able to accomplish it because, again, looking at the time when I was there, many of these problems haven't just happened overnight, but they've been there for a while. But I think now, given that we have, pretty dramatic situation around Europe, one is in the war in Ukraine, we have transatlantic challenges, global challenges, I believe my personal view is that now there is a momentum that we can do something and we get also consensus in Europe. We need political leadership, you need business, but you also need society as a large to understand that we need those things for Europe to play any role. So I think this is very, very important, and it's very comforting to hear you to provide that leadership in Europe, and I think we will support you to the extent that we can. I think the final point I wanted to make on the external dimension, we had the Indian Economics Minister, Piyush Goyal, who is also in touch with your people here, and other countries. I think it's very important to this diversification strategy with the rest of the world. I know you've been saying that. The other coin of it is, of course, this independence, that Europe needs to watch out not to be too dependent on others. And notice you said some very important things on that today. This group is also making the point that we are very interdependent on the business side, also technologies, and that that is not easy to find the right balance. I think we've not done enough of that in the past, but we should, if I may say that, President, that we should not. We have to get the right balance in terms of that security, economic economic trade-off. And this is a little bit what the BGD is all about, and I think we'll take that message and work on that also for next year. The architecture of the geopolitics and how does it look like? Where are our friends? Who should we work with? I think that's very important also economically for Europe, especially for Germany, since we're an export nation, that we get this external dimension done right. But I think your message was very strong, and I think there's independence, there's a mutual dependence, which is also a notion which is there in many industries and sectors, but I think that goes hand in hand with your first notion. But both of those lines of work are very important, and I think Europe has an opportunity now to actually get these things done, and under your leadership for many years now and continuing, I think we'll be able to do this, and we'll do a little bit as much as we can from our side on that. More on the second part than on the third one, the national connection. So thank you again for that. I didn't want to co-lecture here, but I wanted to give you my view since I was part of it before, and it's fascinating to see what's happening now. And I think it's opportunity which is there also from a business community. And I think I hope I speak for most of us that second notion that we need to work together rather than fight. I think is also very important at an international level. So let me thank you again on that, if that's okay, President. She's nodding. And now I'll just close the conference because she has to catch a plane. I'm very happy she's here on her busy schedule, and allow me just to thank everybody, to thank the participants. I know some of you have come a long way. I almost lost my voice. We've been here now for almost 3 days. Attendance, the speakers, there's an advisory committee also, which I want to thank. ESMT, Jörg Rocholl, as the president, I want to thank him. And I want to thank the students also. We have a group of young voices, we call it, which come from all over the world and debating about similar issues. And we are very happy and very proud to have that. And I want to thank my team, the two managing directors, Caroline and Caroline, Caroline and Jenny, where's Caroline? There's Caroline, yeah. So we are a strong team, so thank you very much. And we have a program now for next year. We'll continue this, and we'll like to expand on that issue. I close the conference. I wish you all safe travels back. Be healthy, be safe, enjoy the next year, continue dialoguing, talking to each other then, and don't fight, I think is the conclusion. And I close it officially also in the name of Jörg, and now for those who still have time, there's a barbecue outside. Thank you very much, and see you next year. Bye-bye. Oh yeah, could you please be seated? Just be seated, sorry, yeah. I like the applause, but could you please be seated and let the president walk out, and then I'll walk out with you. She's talking. You're supposed to leave now. Ich gehe mit ihr raus. Ich gebe ihm mal meine Karte.